बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आपका अनअकैडमी यूपीपीसीएस यूट्यूब चैनल पर। तो इकोनॉमिक्स की श्रृंखला में आज हम एक नया सेशन लेके आए हैं और इस सेशन में आज प्रीलिम से संबंधित जो भी बैंकिंग रिफॉर्म की चीज़ें हैं वो हम लोग आज पढ़ेंगे। बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक है, आप ध्यान से सारी बातों को सुनिएगा। मैं हिंदी और इंग्लिश दोनों में बोलूँगा, तो जिसमें आपको सही लगे आप उसमें समझने का प्रयास करिए। चलिए हम लोग स्टार्ट करते हैं बैंकिंग रिफॉर्म्स इन इंडिया। पहले बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आपका। अगर आप इस वीडियो को देख रहे हैं, आप बाद में देखते हैं, क्रैक यूपीपीएससी एंड यूपीपीएससी विद इंडियाज लार्जेस्ट लर्निंग प्लेटफॉर्म। ये अनअकैडमी का ऐप है, आप इसे एप्पल आईफोन पे iOS से या आप एंड्रॉयड पे डाउनलोड कर सकते हैं। आप डाउनलोड करिए, तो आप इसको डाउनलोड करेंगे और आप में अपना ईमेल आईडी डालेंगे, आप इसमें अपना फ़ोन नंबर डालेंगे, तो एक ओटीपी के बाद ये लॉगिन हो जाएगा, पासवर्ड की ज़रूरत नहीं है। और आप इसे लॉगिन करने के बाद आप ढेर सारी स्पेशल क्लासेस बिल्कुल फ्री ऑफ कॉस्ट देख सकते हैं। तो स्पेशल क्लासेस बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण क्लासेस हैं। इनमें जो भी हमारे टॉप एडुकेटर्स हैं वो आपको बहुत मेहनत से क्विज करवाते हैं, जो भी इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक्स हैं वो आपको पढ़ाए जाते हैं। These are Unacademy advantages: anytime, anywhere, live and recorded sessions at your convenience. Opportunity to learn from the best educators and influencers. Get access to best multiple correspondence courses. Structures pedagogy in sync with the academic calendar. Event like workshop, strategy class. Unlimited quizzes, be the host yourself. Study material in PDF format and multiple doubt clearing. विजेता यूपीपीसीएस प्रीलिम्स जीएस पेपर 1 की टेस्ट सीरीज चल रही है। फ्री एमसीक्यू बेस्ड टेस्ट सीरीज है। एवरी संडे को 10 AM पे टेस्ट होता है। आप 1 रैंक लेके आते हैं तो 100% स्कॉलरशिप है। 1 ईयर एवं अबव ड्यूरेशन प्लस। अगर आप 2-3 से बीच के रैंक लेके आते हैं तो आपको 50% स्कॉलरशिप मिलती है। 1 ईयर एवं ड्यूरेशन। दीज आर बैच कोर्सेज। इसलिए बैच कोर्सेज से पहले हम बैंकिंग सिस्टम इन इंडिया की बात कर लेते हैं, क्योंकि ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण चीजें हैं उनको। तो आज हम लोगों को पढ़ना है बैंकिंग सिस्टम इन इंडिया। और आज हमारा जो मेजर जोर रहेगा वो बैंकिंग रिफॉर्म्स पे रहेगा। तो कल काफी बातें हम लोगों ने डिस्कस कर ली थी, आज बची हुई बातें हम लोग डिस्कस करते हैं बैंकिंग सिस्टम इन इंडिया। तो बैंक is a type of financial intermediary as it mediates between the savers and the borrowers. बैंक में एक तरफ क्या है, सेवर्स हैं और एक तरफ बारोवर्स हैं। बैंक क्या है, बैंक एक फाइनेंशियल इंटरमीडिएट मध्यस्थ का काम करती है। किसके बीच में, जो लोग जमा करता है और जो लोग ऋण लेते हैं, ऋणी हैं, इनके बीच में फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन का काम करता है। इट डज सो बाय एक्सेप्टिंग डिपॉजिट्स फ्रॉम द पब्लिक एंड लेंडिंग मनी टू बिजनेस एंड कंज्यूमर्स। The primary liabilities are deposits and primary assets are loans. There are many type of banks in India. जैसे कॉमर्शियल बैंक्स हैं। कॉमर्शियल बैंक में डोमेस्टिक पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक है, डोमेस्टिक प्राइवेट सेक्टर बैंक है, फॉरेन बैंक्स हैं, रीजनल रूरल बैंक्स हैं, पेमेंट बैंक्स हैं और स्मॉल फाइनेंस बैंक को समझने का प्रयास करते हैं। तो डोमेस्टिक पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक है, डोमेस्टिक पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक है, डोमेस्टिक प्राइवेट सेक्टर बैंक है, डोमेस्टिक प्राइवेट सेक्टर बैंक, फॉरेन बैंक्स हैं, आरआरबी हैं, रीजनल रूरल बैंक्स हैं, पेमेंट बैंक्स हैं, पेमेंट्स बैंक्स हैं और स्मॉल फाइनेंस बैंक। इसके बाद कोऑपरेटिव बैंक्स हैं, लैंड डेवलपमेंट बैंक्स हैं, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स हैं और डेवलपमेंट बैंक। Commercial banks and cooperative banks have demand deposits, current account and saving account from them. जो कॉमर्शियल बैंक्स हैं और जो कोऑपरेटिव्स बैंक, these are commercial banks and cooperatives. These are commercial banks and cooperative. But the nature of cooperative banks is different. The customers are the owners of the cooperative bank, and it follows the cooperative principles of one person, one vote. The cooperative banks are registered. The cooperative banks are registered under the Cooperative Societies Act 1912 and are regulated by the Reserve Bank of India under the Banking Regulation Act 1949 and Banking Laws application to the Cooperative Societies Act 1960. Land development banks are originally called Land Mortgage Bank. Presently, they are called State Cooperative Agriculture and Rural Development Bank. They provide long-term finance required by the agriculturist for the purchase of agricultural machinery like tractors for land improvement, etc. Such a credit need is generally not met by commercial banks and cooperative banks because of their short-term. Investment bank deals with the firm primarily, and so they are called merchant banks. Development banks provide long-term finance and support to the sectors of the economy where the risk may be high, and these sectors and subsectors cannot access loans from commercial banks adequately. Examples are Small Industries and Development Bank of India, SIDBI, Mudra Bank or Microunit Development and Reaffirmance Agency Bank, National Housing Bank. Except commercial private banks, no other bank mentioned of accept demand deposits, that is checkable deposits, that deposits on where money can be withdrawn through check. Commercial banks दो टाइप की हैं, scheduled and non-scheduled. Scheduled commercial banks are those which are included in the second schedule of the Reserve Bank of India in 1934. They are regulated under the Bank Regulation Act 1949 and satisfy two conditions under the Reserve Bank of India Act. Paid up capital and reserve of an aggregate value of not less than 5 lakh. It must satisfy RBI that its affairs are not conducted in a manner determined. There are certain benefits that are enjoyed by the scheduled commercial bank, like approaching RBI for financial assistance. Similarly, they can certain obligations like maintaining certain reserves as per the RBI guidelines. There are only 3 non-scheduled commercial banks operating in the country with a total of 9 branches. Local area banks are the non-scheduled commercial banks. Scheduled banks comprise both scheduled commercial banks and scheduled cooperative. India has 21 public sector banks that include the IDDI Bank in 2018, but life insurance corporation account 51%. Controlling stake in IDBI Bank, that it falls in a different category now. In 2019 August, Government of India decided to merge 10 large public sector banks as a part of plans to create fewer and stronger global-sized lenders to boost economic growth. The merger reduced the number of public sector banks to 12. Public sector banks hold over 70% of total assets of the banking. There are public sector bank in total deposits is 26. State Bank of India की बात करें तो it has its root in 19th century when the Bank of Calcutta, later named as Bank of Bengal, was established in 1806. The Bank of Bengal was one of the 3 presidency banks, the other two being the Bank of Bombay and Bank of Madras. All 3 presidency banks was amalgamated in 1921 and became the Empirical Bank. Government nationalized Empirical Bank of India in 1995 and new bank was termed as the State Bank of India. There were 7 regional banks of former Indian princely state. SBI acquired the control of all 7 banks in 1960. They were renamed with the prefix State Bank of Indore, State Bank of Mysore, State Bank of State Bank of South, and State Bank of Travancore. All of them and Bharti Mahila Bank were merged with SBI with effect from 1 April 2017. Okay. After the acquisition of subsidiary banks by the SBI, subsidiary banks have ceased to exist. Therefore, the Parliament passed the State Bank Repeal and Amendment Act of 2015 to amend the SBI Act of 1995 to remove references related to subsidiary banks. It makes SBI one of the top 50 banks in the world. The combined entity is expected to enhance its productivity, mitigate geographical risk, increase operational efficiency, and drive synergies across multiple dimensions while ensuring increased customer satisfaction. Post-merger, the bank will rationalize its branch transfer by relocating some of the branches to maximize reach. This will help the bank optimize its operation. Integration of treasuries of the associated bank with the treasury of SBI will bring the substantial cost saving and synergy in treasury operation. The next major nationalization of bank took place in 1969 when the Government of India nationalized an additional 14 major banks, and again in 1980 Government of India nationalized 6 banks. The objective behind nationalization was to break the ownership and control of banks by a few business families, thus to prevent the concentration of wealth and economy, to make bank a part of socio-economic planning, to extend bank to rural and unbanked areas, to mobilize saving from masses from all part of the country, from all part of the country. ये लग रहा है आपको सुनाई दे रहा होगा. To cater the need of the priority sector like weaker sections and poverty alleviation, agriculture, MSME, etc. So from class banking to mass banking. 50 years of bank nationalization की अगर हम बात करें 50 साल हो गए हैं तो गवर्नमेंट नेशनलाइज द 14 लार्जेस्ट कॉमर्शियल बैंक इन 1969 accounting for 85% of bank deposit. Second out of nationalization of 6 commercial banks followed in 1980. Teams were use them for 5-year plans, make progress towards mass banking from class banking, lend to the peer, take banking to the unbanked areas, reduce inequality. Reduced inequality, reduced rural-urban gap, etc. It has achieved most of these goals and more: reduction of regional imbalance, expansion of bank deposit, boost household savings, credit expansion, green revolution, expand the network of self-help groups, seal the banking system. However, the PSP suffered some problems. That is profitability, you can say. That is managerial inefficiency as working conditions are not comparable to the private banks. Lack of transparency in loan disbursal. To improve the performance of PSP, the following better. Private banks have been allowed to create competition. FDI is being permitted. Bank consolidation is technology being upgraded. Banks are getting connected with differential bank and so on. The results are बैंकिंग रिफॉर्म्स अगर हम देखें 1991 से 1991 से अगर हम बैंकिंग रिफॉर्म्स को देखें बैंकिंग सेक्टर ऑक्युपाइज सेंट्रल प्लेस इन द इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स एंड रिफॉर्म्स दैट इंडिया कंडक्टेड फ्रॉम 1991. The need arose due to deteriorating bank performance that was visible in number one lack of profitability, high statutory liquidity ratio and cash reserve ratio, no credit discipline, loan mela, the loans were liberally given without any merit, lack of competition as there were hardly any private domestic and foreign banks, directed and concessional lending for populistic regions administered interested by the RBI. तो ये दिक्कतें थी भाई. The reforms to set the above problems were interest rate but deregulated to make banks respond dynamically to the market conditions and saving bank deposit rates were deregulated in 2000. Voluntary retirement scheme for better work culture and product. Floor and cap on CRR were removed and floor on SRR were removed. 2006. Floor and cap on CRR was removed. What does it mean? Floor and cap on CRR का मतलब क्या हुआ? मतलब ये हटा दिया गया कि मिनिमम और मैक्सिमम CRR कितना होना चाहिए. कैश रिजर्व रेशियो क्या है बताया था. When we RBI feels finally जो हमने क्या किया तो पहले फ्लोर था 3% का, सीलिंग थी 20%. 2006 से फ्लोर और कैप को हटा दिया. Next level playing field of public, private, and foreign taxing increase. Vessel norms adopted by same bank. FDI up to 74% were permitted in private banks, differentiate banking, unbanked, and also leverage technology to public access to remotely located. Bank consolidation through merger in Dhanush, comprising banking sector reforms, further professionalism, and the above reforms are meant to achieve the following objectives: to make bank competitive and profitable, to strengthen the sector to face global challenges, sound and safe banking, to help banks technologically modernize for customer benefit, make global expertise and capital available by relaxing FDI norms और inclusive. तो जो पहली कमेटी है जो हमको पढ़नी है वो नरसिम्हन कमेटी. Banking sector reforms in India were conducted on the basis of Narasimhan Committee reports 1 1991 and 2 1998. On the first report, जनरली तो ठीक है. तो 1991 में नरसिम्हन पहली रिपोर्ट आती, 1998 में दूसरी. तो रिकमेंडेशन क्या थी? नो मोर नेशनलाइजेशन एज वी नीड टू गिव कॉन्फिडेंस टू डोमेस्टिक, प्राइवेट एंड फॉरेन बैंक. तो हमें डोमेस्टिक बैंक्स हैं, जो प्राइवेट बैंक्स हैं, फॉरेन बैंक्स हैं, को कॉन्फिडेंस दें. क्रिएट ए लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड बिटवीन द पब्लिक सेक्टर, प्राइवेट सेक्टर एंड फॉरेन बैंक. Select few banks like SBI for global operation. Reduce SLR and CRR as that will leave more resources to banks for lending. Rationalize and better target priority sector lending as a reasonable portion of it is vested and also much of it is turning into NPA. Introduce prudential norms for better risk management and transparency in operations. Deregulate interest rate. Set up asset reconstruction company that can take over some of the bad debts of the banks and some institutions. Restructure them on. Some of these reforms were implemented. SLR and CRR were drastically reduced. This expansion in public sector bank led to their listing on the stock exchange and their performance has improved. So Narasimha Ponte, he was an Indian banker who served as the 13th governor to Bank of India from 2 May to 1997. For his contribution बैंकिंग के कारण इन्हें भारत में बैंकिंग सुधार का पिता कहा जाता है. अभी इनकी मत 2021 में IMF के डायरेक्टर है, वर्ल्ड बैंक के डायरेक्टर. पद्म विभूषण भी मिला है इनको भाई. लेकिन बेटी 1991 में आई थी, दूसरी 1998 में आई. So bank merger towards creation of Stamp Public Sector Bank was the first recommendation of Narasimhan. A recent merger of 10 public sector bank in 2020 was building on recommendation from this committee. Asset Reconstruction Committee बनाई है. His committee also introduced the notion of an asset reconstruction fund take over bad loans. As a follow, 6 special debt relief tribunals were set up. They served as the foundation of India's currency insolvency and bankruptcy. It was codified in 2000. ठीक है. तो नरसिम्हन कमेटी आ गई भाई. अब सब स्टैंडर्ड एसेट और एनपीए क्या, इसको समझ लेते हैं. When the borrower pays neither the interest nor the principal for a specified period of time, the loan is said to be non-performing. When a loan is classified in NPA, it goes through several phases as the repayment delays. If the borrower does not pay for the 90 days, the loan becomes the NPA and in turn a special mention account. While this loan remains SMA for a period of less than or equal to 12 months, this term is substandard asset. A sub-standard asset require a provision of 15% on secured portion and 25% of unsecured. After 12 months, a substandard asset is classified as doubtful asset and requires a provision of 25% on secured portion and 100% of. स्टैंडर्ड असेट्स कौन से, एक चीज थोड़ा सा समझनी है. 25% on secured portion and 100% on unsecured portion. तो इसका मतलब क्या हुआ डाउटफुल एसेट? इसका मतलब क्या हुआ बताओ भाई डाउटफुल एसेट? Requires a provision and 100% on the unsecured portion. It requires a provision of 25% on secured portions. अनसिक्योर्ड लोन्स हैं जैसे एजुकेशन लोन्स हैं, देयर 100% प्रोविजंस इवन एट BA1 स्टेज. अब स्ट्रेस एसेट क्या है? When the assets of weakness and is likely to become an NPA, it is contained the stressed asset. RBI allows it to be prevented from becoming an NPA by making terms of loans softer by rescheduling the payment period, lower interest rate, pumping additional assistance. They are classified as standard assets. RBI mandated the banks to make additional disclosure regarding restructured loans, which include the number of proposals received and the amount involved. Nearly 80%, 11% of the total loans given by all the banks became bad loans by 2000. Over 90% of these are public sector loans. The figure is more if we include all troubled loans, including restructured assets, written off loans, and bad loans that are not. NPA can occur for a variety of reasons. ठीक है, चलो एनपीए होता क्यों है? तो बैड लेंडिंग प्रैक्टिसेस है, स्लो डाउन इन इकोनॉमी है, ये भी एक कारण है. पावर डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनी कुड नॉट रिप्लाई ड्यू टू गवर्नमेंट पॉपुलिस्टिक पॉलिसीज ऑफ सप्लाई power free or a very consistent rate. Steel companies are running losses due to competition from imports. Infrastructure company could not get clearance due to environmental reasons, natural calamities, cycle. बिल्कुल डिफॉल्टर ड्यू टू क्रोनिक कैपिटलिज्म. हाई लेवल ऑफ एनपीए का मतलब क्या है? बैंक्स प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी डिमिनिशेस, कैपिटल इज लॉक्ड अप, cost of borrowing will rise as lendable assets shrink. Stock prices of bank will go down and investors will lose. Investment in economy suffer. If banks have to close down, employees and depositors lose. Budget comes under pressure as bailout has to be. What is being done? Provisioning capital adequacy norms according to Basel Surface Act, ARC, foreclosure, one-time settlement, right of write down, debt recovery tribunal, IBC, Money Regulation Act 2017, and recapitalization. Corporate debt restructuring, sustainable structuring of stretched asset or S4A. Strategic debt restructuring were practiced before the IBC come into effect 2007. बताइए, तो सरकार कर तो खूब रही है, तो सरफेसाई एक्ट क्या है? To expedite recovery of loans and bring down the non-performing asset level of the Indian banking and financial sector, the government in 2002 enacted a law called the Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Asset and Enforcement of Security Interest Act 2002. It gave unprecedented power to banks, financial institutions, and asset restructuring securitization companies. The act allows banks and other financial institutions to auction residential or commercial properties in order to recover pending loans. The banks are allowed to take possession of the collateral property and sell it without permission of the court. The law allows the creation of asset restructuring companies and enables banks to sell their non-performing. ठीक है? Banks are allowed to take possessions of the collateral property and sell it without prior recommendation of court. The law allows the creation of asset restructuring company and enables them to sell to the non-performing asset to ARC. In 2016, the laws was amended to make the process more expedient. Asset restructuring company. Some non-performing assets are revivable. These assets, if turned around, would not only create additional jobs but also contribute to the national output. However, timely intervention and right management are required to make them productive and profitable. ARCs are non-successful. RBI gives license for ARCs and regulates them. Narasimhan Committee on Banking Sector recommended them to take the NPA of the lenders book. RBI gives license for ARCs and regulates. ARC under Surface Act can buy NPA from banks and other financial institutions with benefit like monetizing the NPA, cleaning up the balance sheet of banks, freeing the financial system. तो ARC क्यों बनाया गया? Benefits क्या हैं? Facilitating development of market for distressed assets. As per RBI, ARC perform the following functions: acquisition of financial assets, change or takeover of management, rescheduling of debts, settlement of dues payable by the borrower. Government of India make various legislative and Government of India has यस बेटा क्लास करो इथिक्स की, अगर चाह रहे हो तो सबसे अच्छी बुक वही है, ठीक है? तो इथिक्स का बैच भी स्टार्ट हो रहा है, ठीक है? यस, पहले सुन लो, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज डिस्कस कर रहे हैं. Government of India made various legislative and regulatory changes that created an enabling and supportive operational environment for ARCs and for takeover of stressed assets. These include 100% of FDI in ARC, etc. As a result, the number of new ARCs have come up. If ARC succeeded, it would have paved the way for various cycle of fresh investment, new job, and additional demand. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code IBC 2016 provides opportunity for asset restructuring. What is asset quality review? Bank management is concerned with the quality of their loans since they provide earning from the bank. They are reluctant to classify a loan as bad loan even if they may give further loans to the defaulted loanee so as to make him repay with the borrowed money because that will show the loan as standard in their balance sheet of the bank. It is a process called evergreening or window dressing. Banks resort to it also become if a loan is classified as NSA. Banks have banks have to set aside some of their own money as security against. Banks have to set aside some of their own money as security against. ये भी समस्या है. वही हम लोग बात कर रहे थे कि जब किसी बैंक को हम सब स्टैंडर्ड एसेट बोलते हैं, सब प्रोविजन 50% ऑन सिक्योर्ड पोर्शन and 25% on the unsecured exposure. 12 months इसमें 25% और अनसिक्योर्ड पे 100%. उतना पैसा बैंक को रखना पड़ेगा, वो भी समस्या है. खैर, उतना पैसा बैंक को रखना पड़ेगा अपने आप में समस्या, अगर आप समझ पा रहे हो तो. However, in the medium and long term, it will weaken the bank further. Such amount cannot be lent and so burden the bank fine. Therefore, special inspections were conducted by RBI in 2015. In addition to the routine inspection to ensure that the asset classification made by banks is genuine. It is called asset quality review. RBI conducted some more AQR in the subsequent years. It reveals the actual extent of NPA. ठीक है. चलो अब इसके बाद आया prompt correct action. In general, RBI is the agency in charge of financial stability and banking has to prevent crisis. Therefore, it adopted a prompt corrective action framework, which is invoked when certain risks thresholds are breached. The risks are related to asset quality, profitability, capital, and levels of NPA. If the limit is specified as crossed, RBI will interest the banks to follow remedial measures. Prompt corrective action norms allow the regulator to place certain restrictions, such as halting branch expansion and stopping dividend payment on banks. The PCA can even cap the lending limit of a bank to one entity or sector. The other corrective sections that can be imposed on banks include audit, restructuring operation, activation of recovery plan. Banks promoters can be asked to bring in some new management policies too. The RBI has the right to support the bank board under PCA. Safety of bank and vessel norms. Bank lend to different style of borrowers and each has their own risk. They lend the deposit of public as well as the money raised from the market equity and debt. The intermediation activity exposes the bank to a variety of risks. Banks have to follow basically ध्यान से सुनते रहिए prudent practices to prevent bad loans and withstand bad loans. Therefore, banks are recommended to keep aside a certain percent of capital as security against the risks of non-recovery. Income must be recognized only when realized. Assets must be classified and provisions must be made. Certain capital should be set aside from profits, equity, and debt at security against risk. Thus, income recognition, asset classification, provisioning norms, and capital adequacy are interrelated and aim at safe banking. Prudential norms make the operation transparent, accountable, and safe, and serve two primary purposes: bring out the true position of bank's loan portfolio and help in prevention of the deterioration. Basel Committee provided the norms called Basel norms to tackle a variety of risks that bank faces. The Basel Accord, Basel 1, 2, and 3 are issued by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. They are called the Basel Accord, and the BSB maintains a secretariat in BIS in Basel, Switzerland, and the committee normally meets there. The aim of the Basel Accord is to ensure that banks and other financial institutions have enough capital to make their obligation to depositors and their stakeholders and absorb unexpected losses. Capital is basically profit that accumulate as reserve, debt, and equity. अब Basel 1 क्या है? In 1988, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision permits a set of minimum capital requirements for banks. They were known as Basel 1. It focused almost entirely on credit risk. Basel 2 was introduced in 2004, focusing on more risk and remedies. It is a global voluntary regulatory framework on bank capital adequacy. It was agreed upon 2010-11 and was introduced in 2013 to be adopted in 31st March 2019. It was developed in response to the deficiencies in financial regulations revealed by the financial crisis of 7-8. The major thrust area of the Basel III is improvement of quantity and quality of capital of banks, with stronger supervision, risk management, and disclosure standards. ठीक है बेटा, समझते हैं अब हम समझते हैं ठीक है बेटा. कैमरा कुछ गड़बड़ है क्या? ठीक है बेटा, यहां तक क्लियर है. तो बेसल 1, 2 और बेसल 3 की बात करते हैं. बेसल 3 में क्या था? इट इज ए ग्लोबल वॉलंटरी रेगुलेटरी फ्रेमवर्क on bank capital adequacy, stress testing, etc. It was agreed on 2010-11 and was introduced in 2013 to be adopted till 31st March 2019. It was developed in response to the deficiencies in financial regulations revealed by the financial crisis of 2007-8. The major thrust area of Basel III is improvement of quantity and quality of capital of banks. With stronger supervision, risk management, and disclosure standards. Under Basel III norms, banks have to have a total capital adequacy ratio of 11.5% against 9% earlier. Basel III has three pillars. Pillar 1 is made up of risk. Pillar 2 enlarges the role of banking supervision. Pillar 3 defines the standard and requirement of higher disclosure of banks on capital adequacy, asset quality, and other risk management processes. Basel 3 norms cover three risks: credit risk, market risk, and operation. कैमरे का लीड कैसे निकल गई यार? लीड निकल गई बेटा. लीड निकल गई थी, कोई बात नहीं. तो क्लियर नहीं आ रहा वीडियो. Credit risk क्या है? A bank faces the risk that some of its borrowers may not repay loan, interest or both. The risk is called credit risk, which varies from borrower to borrower depending on their credit quality. Basel III requires bank to accurately measure credit risk to hold sufficient capital to recover market risk. As part of the statutory mechanism, In the form of statutory liquid ratio (SLR), banks are required to invest in liquid assets such as cash, gold, government, and other approved securities. Market risk as part of the basically even beta. As part of the statutory requirement, in the form of statutory liquid ratio, banks are required to invest in liquid assets such as cash, gold, government, and other approved securities. Some money of the bank is also invested in other assets like shares, real estate. Such investment is spent except the government securities, which carry zero risk, are risk as prices fluctuate. It is known as the market risk, as the value of the investment depends on market. Operational risk is on fraud, security, physical infrastructure shutdown, or cyber attack, and digital threat. Then what is capital adequacy norms? To absorb the risk mentioned above, banks need to have adequate capital set at a certain level as capital adequacy risk, which is the same as capital to risk weighted asset risk. Capital to risk weighted asset risk. It is expressed as a percentage of bank risk weighted credit historically. All business consumers who borrow agriculture, exporter are calculated to have a certain quantified level of risk. Each sector carries its own level of risk depending on past performance. Government securities and cash carry zero risk. Its purpose is to protect depositors and promote stability and efficiency of financial systems around the world. RBI mandated the CRR at 9%, which is higher than the international norm of at least 8%. Under Basel III norms, a counter-cyclical capital buffer prescribed. Keep aside capital that is used when the cycle turns down due to slowdown or recession and the loans may turn bad. 81 bond क्या है? 81 bonds are additional Tier 1 bonds that were introduced at the pass of Basel III norms after 2008 global financial crisis to strengthen bank capital in the face of uncertainty. 81 bonds are unsecured interest-bearing subordinated perpetual non-convertible bonds. Subordinated or junior means that a protection they enjoy less than regular debt. They have a claim on the bank's resources in the event of liquidation after the senior debt. 81 bonds being perpetual bonds fetch interest but have no expiry date. Not having an expiry date is a feature of equity. Since these bonds have the feature of debt and equity, they are treated as quasi-equity instrument bond under the law. RBI is the regulator of these bonds. They pay a fixed rate of interest at regular interval like bonds. Usually these bonds pay slightly higher rate of interest compared to regular bonds because they are unsecured. Perpetual bonds are redeemed when the issuing bank decided to. They are listed on stock exchanges. The bond holder can sell the bonds on the to liquidate the bond for money. There are 81 bonds. If we talk about India and CAR, as per the RBI direction, the Basel III capital regulation is being implemented from April 1, 2013 India and phases, and it was finally adopted in. अब इसमें एक समस्या है कि हमको एक बार CAR समझना है कि व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय CAR, कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी रेशियो क्या है, इसको समझने का प्रयास करते हैं. कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी, ठीक है. व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी रेशियो, इसको समझने का प्रयास. CAD क्या है? कैपिटल एडिक्वेसी रेशियो it is the ratio of bank capital to bank risk. CAR. So risk. It is bank capital to risk weighted asset and current liability. The ratio utilized to secure depositors and boost the efficiency and stability. It is also known as CRAR. CRAR भी कहते हैं. टायर 1 कैपिटल क्या है? CAR. Eligible Tier 1 capital funds. The market rated risk weighted asset plus credit risk weighted plus operational risk RWA. टोटल CAR क्या होगा? एलिजिबल टोटल कैपिटल. Tier 1 capital. This can note there are two types of capital. टायर वन कैपिटल क्या है? These can absorb the losses without a bank being required to stop trading. And also core capital, that consists of ordinary share capital, equity, audited revenue reserves, intangible assets. This is permanently available capital and ready available to absorb losses incurred by a bank without us having to seek office. Tier 2 capital. They can absorb losses the bank is binding up and so gives depositors a lesser measure of protection. That consists of unaudited reserves, unaudited related earnings, and general house reserves. This capital cautions losses the bank is binding up and is used to absorb losses after the bank loses all its Tier 1 capital. Then risk-weighted, these assets are used to fix the least amount of capital that should be possessed by bank to lower the insolvency risk. The capital requirement of all type of depend on risk assessment. Banks have two main sources of capital that are quantitably different from one another. Tier 1, it refers to a bank's core capital, equity, and the disclosed reserve that appear in the bank's financial statement. Tier 1 capital. Tier 2, it refers to a bank's supplementary capital, such as undisclosed reserves, unsecured subordinate debt instruments that must have a original maturity of at least 5 years. तो टायर 1 टायर 2 कैपिटल बता दिया भाई आपने आपको। तुमने आपको टायर 1 टायर 2 कैपिटल समझाने का प्रयास किया है, ठीक है बेटा। अब बताओ क्या किया जाए। ठीक है, रिकैपिटलाइजेशन क्या है? तो बेसल 1 और इतना ही अगर हम लोग अच्छे से पढ़ लेते हैं तो वो ही बहुत है भाई। अगर हम बेसल नॉर्म्स और ये सब चीजें नरसिम्हन कमेटी की रिपोर्ट पढ़ लेते हैं तो ठीक है भाई। हैं आगे देखो, मैंने आपको कुछ नोट्स दिए थे इसमें, तो नोट्स को एक बार समझने का प्रयास करते हैं। आरबीआई मैंडेट्स that the commercial bank to maintain CRAR, capital to risk-weighted asset, SCR, capital adequacy ratio. The CRAR decided globally to check and correct the situation of insolvency in banks, lending to situation of bank runs. This issue was first taken up under the Basel Accord. The Basel Accord is a set of guidelines decided by the BIS, Bank for International Settlement, located in Basel, Switzerland. In the 1980s, Basel Accord is mainly banking supervision rules in minimum capital requirement agreed upon by the G10 major Western economies in the wake of money massive bank collapse. These rules are set by a committee that meets in Basel, Switzerland at the Bank of International Settlement. The first accord was reached in 1988 and its standard was widely followed throughout the world. 1998 Basel Capital Accord, Basel I, has been implemented at the capital adequacy standard in more than 100 countries successfully. Basel I has, especially with the respect to its crude measurement of bank credit, the risk weight assigned for the purpose of capital assessment was based on the type of assets and not on the quality of assets. Thus, a bank having a portfolio with low risk assets, a bank having a portfolio of high risk assets, acted at the level of. In 1998, Basel I norms were adopted. 8% of CRR. The central bank of every country is a member of BIS. For example, RBI is a permanent member of BIS. The CAR is basically a ratio of bank's capital to acts as a cushion, shock absorber, protects the bank depositors and other lenders. introduced to check bank runs or failure of banks, which can have a damaging impact on economies. Since thus, it is essential to maintain the CAR. The CAR is maintained with the Basel. The Basel norms are a set of recommendations on banking laws and regulations issued by the Basel board to create an international standard for banking regulators to control how much capital are in the types of financial operations. They introduced the concept of CAR in 1990. The Basel norms are a set of recommendations. So it was first published in 2004 to create an. However, the India introduced the CAR 19. It was supposed to be introduced in 1990. The RBI is the nodal agency to implement CAR among Indian financial institutions, such as scheduled commercial banks, including bank, Indians, foreign banks, RBs, lenders, and NBFCs. Currently, India is following Basel III norms announced in 2010. However, the RBI had to implement it according to RBI direction. The Basel III capital regulation has been implemented in 2013 and finally adopted on 30 March 2009. As per the Basel III norms, 10.5% of CRA is to be maintained by banks, whereas the RBI has kept CRA at only 9%. The Basel are only indicated, and onus of implementing lies on the central regulatory bank of the country. अब now what is non-performing asset? लेकिन जो बैंकिंग में हमको वो देखना था कि कौन कौन से तरीके की बैंकिंग है, क्या है, वो कहीं बहुत अच्छा अगर आप देखोगे तो आपको पढ़ना चाहिए, क्योंकि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है. कॉमर्शियल बैंक क्या है, फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूट, उसमें भी ठीक दिया है. अगर हम देखें बैंकिंग रिलेशन, रीजन रूरल बैंक मैं बता सकता हूँ, नेशनल बैंक ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर रूरल, नहीं बहुत दिया है, तरीके से भी हम कर सकते. अच्छा, इसमें एक चीज जो इम्पोर्टेंट है मुझे लग रही है, जो आपको देखनी चाहिए, तो परसों मैंने आपको नोट्स दिए थे. देखो उसमें सब चीजें लिखी है, नहीं लिखी है. ठीक है, नॉन परफॉर्मिंग एसेट्स क्या है? उसको बताओ भाई, अभी मैंने आपको एनपीए समझाया है, अब आप मुझे दोबारा बताइए कि एनपीए क्या है। अब आप मुझे दोबारा बताइए कि एनपीए क्या है, मुझे दोबारा बताइए। बताइए। Non-performing asset is a loan or advance for which the principal or interest payment has remained overdue for a period of 90 days. A case of agricultural advance, a loan granted for short duration contract at NPA if the installment of the principal and interest paid for two crop seasons beyond the due date. The loan under long duration crops or one crop season beyond the due date. NPA नहीं पे फंसा है. A capital conservation buffer is to be maintained in which banks are advised to keep aside their profits made in good times to use in the time of difficulty, especially to support market risk or foreign currency risk. Bank capital can be calculated in the following manner. बैंक कैपिटल में तीन चीजें हैं. तो टायर वन कैपिटल में शेयर कैपिटल डिस्क्लोज्ड रिजर्व्स, सीआरआर, एसएलआर. टायर टू में अदर रिजर्व्स, अनडिस्क्लोज्ड रिजर्व्स और हाइब्रिड कैपिटल, लोन प्लस इक्विटी प्लस सबऑर्डिनेट डेट. Banks are required to classify NPA further into substandard, doubtful, and loss asset. Substandard asset that have remained NPA for a period less than or equal to 12 months. Doubtful asset, which would be classified as doubtful if they have remained in the substandard category for a period of. Lost asset, as per the RBI, lost as uncollectible, and if continuance as a bankable asset is not warranted. Although there may be some salvage or recovery value, in other words, under the RBI the loans. NPA of listed banks. इसमें जो देखो इन्होंने बताया था इस चीज को, रिस्क बताया था, और इससे पहले सब स्टैंडर्ड एनपीए. अब एनपीए कंट्रोल कैसे किया जाए? तो सरफेसाई एक्ट आता है 2002 में. The securitization and reconstruction of financial asset and enforcement of security, the legislation that help financial institutions with asset quality multiple. The act was framed to address the problem of NPA or bad asset through different mechanisms. With increasing level of non-performing or stressed asset in the Indian financial. Following the recent enactment of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, The Indian Parliament has now passed the Enforcement of Security Recovery of Debt Laws and Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Act. The Amendment Act introduced a number of changes to Surface Act and the recovery of debt due to banks and financing. These changes will, however, come into effect as and when the government is appropriate. तो 2015 में भारत सरकार ने इन धनुष स्कीम चलाई, which includes a plain program for bank recapitalization. Meanwhile, the RBI initiated a five and structure which create incentives for the banks to come together with their borrowers. Resolving the TVF challenge comprehensively would require 4 R's. Reforms: bank must need their asset as far as possible close to their true value. However, there is a sequence to those 4 R. Recognition must come first, but the company itself that how the resources generated by a government to recapitalize public sector bank in the right fiscal position of the government. One possible source is the public sector own balance sheet. For example, the governor could sell off asset that is no longer want to hold, such as certain non-financial companies, to use the proceeds to make additional investment in the PSC. This option is reasonable, well understood. What is less of this, the RBI could do the same. That is to say, it could redeploy its capital. Like our financial firms, central bank holds capital to provide a buffer against the risk they take. In the case of central banks, risk arises because the value of the foreign exchange reserve in terms of domestic fluctuates along with the exchange. While the value of government security, they changes as interest rates move. Measuring those risks and calculating how much buffer should be provided against them is difficult. For this is a central bank capital holding very bad. When the resource to back recognition are identified, resolution and reform can be persuaded with vigor. There are many questions, including crediting bad banks to implement the 4R. Then second, asset restructuring company. At asset restructuring company ARC is a specialized financial institution that buys the NPAs or bad assets from banks and financial institutions so that the latter can clean up their balance sheet. In other words, ARCs are in the business of buying bad loans. ARCs clean up the balance sheet of banks when the latter sell these to the ARCs. These help banks to concentrate in normal banking activity. Banks, rather than going after the defaulters by wasting the can sell the bad assets to the ARC at a Debt Recovery Tribunal 1990. Debt Recovery Tribunal were established to facilitate debt recovery involving banks and other financial institutions with their customers. The RTs was set up after the passing of RDD-BFI Act of 1993. Recovery of debts due to banks and financial institutions. DRT can take cases from banks for dispute loan of above INR 10 lakh. At present, there are 33 DRTs and 5 DRAT for various parts of the country. In 2014, the government created 6 new DRTs to the loan-related disputes. Then, Structured Debt Recovery Tribunal scheme was introduced in the RBI in June 2015. Under this scheme, banks who have given loans to corporate borrowers get the right to convert the part or full of their loans into equity share in the loan taken. The SDR scheme helps banks recover their loans by taking control of the dispute. तो बहुत अच्छी बात बता रहे हैं भाई, इन सब चीजों को समझने का प्रयास करिए, यही मैं आपसे बार बार कह रहा हूँ, है नहीं? इन्हीं चीजों को आप समझने का प्रयास करिए. स्ट्रक्चर्ड डेप्ट रिकवरी सिस्टम, ये भी देखना पड़ेगा भाई. तो द स्ट्रक्चर्ड डेट रिकवरी स्कीम वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड इन द आरबीआई, तो तुमने देख लिया, तो मैंने आपको समझा दिया आसान, ठीक है। अब स्कीम फॉर सस्टेनेबल स्ट्रक्चरिंग ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर्ड एसेट, द स्कीम फॉर सस्टेनेबल स्ट्रक्चरिंग ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर्ड एसेट was launched by the Reserve Bank of India on 13 June 2016, named so for addressing the large stressed asset corporate sector to S4A, sustainable structuring of structured asset. 4A, 4A, scheme for sustainable for the S4 is the RBI latest attempt to try and reduce the increasing amount of increased stressed loan in Indian banks. The scheme tries to strike a compromise between banks with problem accounts and corporate defaulters of the non-billable variety by converting a portion of large loan amount into equity shares. For a distressed company to be eligible for S4A, the RBI has laid down three conditions. The project must be operating and already generating cash. The total loans of the entity should be 500 crore or more. The lending bank are required to hire an independent agency to evaluate how much of the debt is sustainable. For the loan to be eligible to S4A, at least 50% of the loan should be sustainable. While the RBI earlier ideas to resolve bad loans such as strategic debt restriction tribunal banks to oust existing promoters, S4A allows the incumbent management to continue as long as the default is not built. उसमें अंतर था। आरबीआई की अर्लियर आइडियाज थे स्ट्रेटेजिक डेप्ट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग, स्ट्रेटेजिक डेप्ट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग ये चीज थोड़ा सा तुम्हें समझनी पड़ेगी। स्ट्रक्चर्ड डेट रिकवरी स्कीम क्या है? The structured debt recovery scheme was introduced in 2015 under this scheme. Banks who have given loan to a corporate borrower get the right to convert the full or part of their loans into equity share in the loan-taking company. The SDR scheme helps banks recover their loans by taking control of the distressed listed companies. The SDR initiative can be taken by a group of banks or a joint lender forum that the given loan to a particular drafting entity. The JLF is a committee comprised of all the bankers who have given loans to a stressed or potentially stressed borrower. At present, bank can form a JLF if the account by the borrower is classified as special mention account 2, not paid any money back in the last 60 days. The Debt Recovery Tribunal and Asset Restructuring Company as example of JLF. अच्छा, Debt Recovery Tribunal and Asset Restructuring Companies are the example of JLF. Similarly, the strategic debt restructuring is an attempt to revive a small project by giving equity participation to banks in such projects. Converting debt or equity is main approach toward strategic debt restructuring. अब इसमें क्या है? इसमें भी तो यही हो रहा है, पोर्शन ऑफ लार्ज लोन अकाउंट इनटू इक्विटी शेयर। उसमें एक्चुअल डिफरेंस अगर हम देखें, स्ट्रक्चर्ड डेट रिकवरी स्कीम एंड S4A, structured debt recovery scheme, structured debt recovery scheme and S4A difference. इस पूरे को ध्यान से समझ लीजिए। RBI is the scheme to push banks to quickly resolve the problem account. This means the borrowing being by Indian companies during the boom time from 2003 to 2008 actually has left Indian banks saddled with a large pile of bad loans. At last count, they accounted to around 11.5% of their total. The pile of unpaid debt has led to big write-offs that have dented banks' profits, gobbled up bank capital, and made them very giving out new loans that can keep the wheels of the economy turning. The RBI is the scheme to push banks to quickly resolve the problem accounts, given that they come in all shapes and sizes. ये एक्चुअली क्यों कर रहे हैं? चलो कोई बात नहीं, दोनों में अंतर तो है भाई, कुछ अंतर किया। स्ट्रक्चर्ड डेट रिकवरी एस्टोरियो स्ट्रक्चर में अंतर क्या है, सिर्फ इतना जानना। देखिए मैंने इसका आपको नोट्स दिया था, ठीक है। ठीक है बेटा, चलो कोई बात नहीं। तो पारा की बात हो रही है। Public sector asset restructuring agency PARA is an independent entity that will identify the longest and most vexatious NPA accounts held by banks and buy these out from them. Concept was originally proposed in Economic Survey 2015. By consolidating problem across banks, the PARA is expected to solve two problems. One, it can effect speedier settlements, which borrowers by cutting over individual banks. Two, as a single large lender, it can drive a better bargain with borrowers and take more governance. PARA is expected to raise capital for its buyers for government. चलो बैंक्स की मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी की हम बात कर लें, बैंक्स एंड मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी, तो कुछ कमेटीज हैं जैसे monetary policy reform narrow sense refers to the credit control of central bank. In this broad sense, it means that the monetary and non-monetary measures that influence the cost and supply money. It refers to a government policy that regulates and controls the flow, availability, and cost of money and credit in the market. Monetary policy includes institutional change in the banking and credit system. Clear यहाँ तक? The monetary policy in India is formulated and operated by RBI. देखो इसमें तो कोई डाउट नहीं. So monetary policy in India is formulated and operated by the RBI. Since the beginning of first 5-year plan, the principal objective of monetary policy as adopted by the RBI have been economic development and price stability. The objective of financial policy was added after the introduction of economic reforms in 1991. According to the ex-RBI governor by B. Reddy, economic monetary policy had the following objective: economic growth and development, economic stability, economic generation, development of monetary and financial system, maintenance of balance of payment and the exchange value of the rupee. सारी चीजें आपको हो इसमें आपको मिल जाएंगी. These objectives were used by RBI to control the banking and financial institution excessively, led to the beginning of a crisis in banking institution. More particularly because the banks had maintained a high CRR about 15%, high SLR 30%, increased priority sector lending 41%. The consequence of this crisis was rise in NPA, poor performance of bank, the beginning of reforms from 1991 onwards. The Narasimhan Committee 1991, this committee was constituted for effecting some significant reforms in the banking side. This, the RBI also announced a change in stand taken by their monetary policy by outlining the clear-cut objective. According to Bhavi Reddy, after 1990, the monetary policy of RBI now carried two objectives: economic growth and development, economic stability and controlling. The Narasimhan Committee recommended that the RBI should rarely use the CRR for controlling the banking. The SLR should be brought down and weaker banks should immediately or must be strong. 1991 में reports आई. 1998, this committee recommended monetary prudential norms for banks, which refers to asset classification and provisioning of NPAs so that the economic recognition of banks become transparent. It suggested the creation of a banking system to address the demand of capital account convertibility, through which banks can dare to directly convert foreign exchange to rupee and vice versa without the RBI approval. In this respect, committee recommended a 3-tier bank reserve. नेशनल लेवल पे 2-3 बैंक हो, नेशनल लेवल पे 8-10 बैंक हो, लोकल लेवल पे ऑल अदर बैंक. Unlike the Narasimhan Committee, even the committee recommended not to merge small and big banks, but rather strong and strong. तो भैया बड़ी बड़ी बैंक को मिलाओ, छोटी छोटी बैंक को मत मिलाओ. बड़ी बड़ी बैंक को इन्होंने कहा आप मिलाइए. शायद बात आप समझ पा रहे होंगे मैं आपसे क्या कहना. हाँ, क्लियर बेटा, यहाँ तक क्लियर है? यहाँ तक कोई डाउट तो बताओ, बोलो. शिव, ठीक है बेटा. तो दुकान खुली होगी क्या उसकी? भी देख लो शायद खुली है. उसके बाद 1998 में खॉन वर्किंग ग्रुप आया. द ग्रुप इंट्रोड्यूस्ड द concept of universal bank, which refers to the concept of offering all financial products under one roof. Both financial institutions and banks were allowed to undertake all kinds of banking activities, financing and related business. For example, bank assurance. Here on the Rajanita Committee, the committee was founded in 2000 but gave recommendation in 2002. It was formulated to re-examine the banking sector reforms and changing the legal system so that the problem of raising NPA could be controlled. Urjit Patel Katoti, Urjit Patel Committee 2013. It was constituted for redefining the monetary policy. तो क्यों constitute हुई थी? ताकि monetary policy को redefine किया जा सके. ठीक है. इसका मिलेगा कैमरा थोड़ा सा खराब हो गया तो चेंज कराएंगे. तो आप लोग पढ़ते रहो और सुनाई तो दे ही रहना पूरा. क्यों परेशान हो रहे हो? सुनाई तो पूरा दे ही रहना भाई तुम. ओ यहाँ तक कोई डाउट हो तो बताओ बेटा. ठीक है। अब उर्जित पटेल कमेटी को कॉन्स्टिट्यूट गई फॉर रीडिफाइनिंग द मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. The rationality of this committee was founded the background of RBI failure in the past to control inflation, which can be of two types. तो यहाँ पे एक छोटी सी बात एक क्यों साफ करा दो यार. तो आरबीआई कमेटी दो तरीके के इन्फ्लेशन है, डिमांड पुल और कास्ट पुश इन्फ्लेशन. तो ये तो क्लियर है. इंडिया रिसेंटली फेस्ड दिस stubborn inflation, especially on food items, and the RBI, which is solely responsible for controlling inflation, failed to control it. Thus, the RBI mandatory policy with dual objectives has failed to control inflation as well as maintain economic growth. As a result, the RBI constituted the Urjit Patel Committee for single objective, that is controlling inflation, and the objective of economic growth should be given to the Government of India directly. The committee further gave the significant recommendation on inflation targeting based on CPI. It refers to maintaining inflation at a certain level at which the economy performs optimally. It was introduced for the first time in New Zealand in 1991 and then became popular in Canada, Australia, South Africa, and Brazil. All the committees, Narasimhan Committee, Raghuram Rajan Committee, PRC Mystery Committee 2008 and the Financial Sector Legislative Reform Committee headed by Justice B.N. Krishna. क्या है भाई? So the Monetary Policy Committee, with the aim of maintaining price stability while keeping in mind the objective of growth, it is a six-member body including the RBI governor. The members of MPC appointed by the central government hold office for a period of 4 years. The MPC is responsible to the parliament. The committee is required to meet at least 4 times in a year and make public decisions following each meeting. There is no reappointment of the committee. As a member of MPC, the governor had a casting vote and does not enjoy veto power. There was veto power for this position in the earlier system. Decisions are taken on the basis of majority vote. The main responsibility of the MPC is to administer the inflation targeting monetary policy regime by determining the policy rate or repo rate or to curtail inflation targeting find to relevance against the backdrop of the Phillips curve, which suggests that there is an investment relationship between investment and unemployment. ठीक है. इतना इन्होंने देखो इसमें मैंने आपको पढ़ा दिया है, तो इसको आप खुद भी थोड़ा सा पढ़िए. फिर अगर हम अगली उसकी बात करें तो नचिकेता मोर कमेटी 2013. The committee was appointed by the RBI in September 2013, being objective for financial inclusion and financial deepening in India. The major competition of each adult should have their bank account linked with Aadhaar. The CR and SLR should be revised by the RBI. Since the SLR has been outlived the utility for both banks and government, the SLR should be removed. Priority sector lending should be increased from 40 to 50%. It introduced the concept of payment bank, which cater to the need of unorganized workers, especially in urban areas. इसके बाद पीजे नायक कमेटी 2014. This committee was constituted by the RBI in May 2014 to reforming both public and private sector banks. The major recommendation of this commission was as follows. Government interference has adversely affected the corporate sector and public sector banks, and so it recommended for the removal of the dual control of RBI and Ministry of Finance. Banks also have faced dual external oversight from CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, CBC, Business Commission, which impacts the normal functioning. There is a fear factor involved, which makes banks hold back prudent commercial decisions. to reduce the government shareholding to below 50%, but this should not be taken as the privatization to PSB. It offered the recommendation of the Tarapur Committee in 1997, in which all PSBs were to be incorporated under the Company Act 2013. This was not to only provide freedom in their operation, but also tap the capital market for their financial activity, as normally they are dependent on the government. Vimal Jalan Committee. This committee was formed by the Government of India to shortlist the new entities in the banking sector on the basis of criteria prescribed by RBI. The criteria was follows: 10 years of entities' track record are to be checked. The entity should be ready to open at least 25% of branches in area where the population is below 10,000. On this basis, new bank licenses were issued to Mumbai-based Infrastructure Development Finance Company (IDFC) and Kolkata-based microlender Bandhan Bank. Bandhan is the first commercial bank from Eastern India to receive RBI clearance since independence. Bank Board Bureau 2016. Recently, in February 2016, the Bank Board Bureau was established by the Ministry of Finance under the chairmanship of ex-Craig Binod Rai to simplify, examine the feasibility and viability of the NAIC committee recommendation with respect to providing corporate governance to PSB in India. It acts as a recommendation body to the government in bringing reforms in the bank function. The board's primary task is to determine ways to determine the government control over PSB. However, it has already attracted criticism by trade, labor, and bankers union with respect to the government's agenda of decontrolling and privatization of the banking sector. इसमें थोड़ी समस्या है, आपको देखनी पड़ेगी. Functioning of the Bank Bureau Board to recommend the selection of heads of PSB and financial institutions, to develop strategic and capital raising plans to promote e-governance in banking and financial institutions. इतनी चीजें हैं तो इसमें है, लेकिन इसके आसपास चीजें थोड़ा हमें समझनी पड़ेंगी. ठीक है. यहाँ तक कोई डाउट हो तो बताइए आप. कोई डाउट हो तो बताइए. यहाँ तक कोई डाउट हो तो बताइए, फिर हम आगे स्टार्ट करते हैं. तो लंबी क्लास हो गई, लेकिन आप देखते रहिए, आपको डेफिनेटली लास्ट तक आपको आनंद आएगा. तो ये तो हो गया बैंक ब्यूरो बोर्ड. अब ये S4A इंद्रधनुष स्कीम, ये सब स्कीम थोड़ी सी हमको देखनी पड़ेंगी. एक बार इंद्रधनुष स्कीम देखते हैं. इंद्रधनुष स्कीम्स क्या है, सबके रिकमेंडेशन की थी वो समय तो ठीक, बैंक के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट. तो नीट बेसिकली इंद्रधनुष फॉर PSB that was launched by government in 2015. The government to resolve the Indhanus for PSB mission is a revamping the functional program to enable them to compete with the private sector banks. Seek to revive economic growth through the reduction of political interference in the functioning of PSB and improving credit. It is very important topic actually. So पहला appointments था. Many of the measures suggested by the PJ Naik committee on the banking reforms, the 7 component of the mission plan to address the challenges faced by public sector banks. तो बैंक बोर्ड बनेंगे, कैपिटलाइजेशन होगा, डिस्ट्रेसिंग इम्प्रूवमेंट फ्रेमवर्क. तो एक तो ये है, और दूसरा एक कमेटी थी, वो थोड़ा सा आप लोग देखो. इसने इन सब के लिए रिकमेंड किया था, विनिमय के लिए. इसको थोड़ा सा यहाँ से समझने का प्रयास करते हैं. ठीक है बेटा, आगे देखो। तो पेमेंट बैंक, अगर हम आपसे कहें तो पेमेंट बैंक किस कमेटी की रिकमेंडेशन से आए, ये मुझे बताइए। पेमेंट बैंक क्या है? ये बैंक जैसे एयरटेल पेमेंट बैंक, इंडिया पोस्ट पेमेंट बैंक इज लाइक एनी अदर बैंक बट ऑपरेटेड इन स्मॉलर और रिस्ट्रिक्टेड स्केल। तो जो पेमेंट बैंक है वो भी इन्हीं से रजिस्टर होंगे। इन्हें कैश रिजर्व रेशियो मेंटेन करना होता है। रिक्वायर्ड टू इन्वेस्ट 75% ऑफ डिमांड बैलेंस इन स्टैट्यूटरी लिक्विडिटी सोल्यूबल गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज ट्रेजेबल विद मैच्योरिटी अप टू 1 year। Need to hold maximum 25% in current and time fixed deposit with other scheduled commercial banks for operational purpose। और टेम्पररी प्रोमोटर क्या होते हैं, क्रेडिट्स क्या होता है, पेड अप कैपिटल क्या होता है, ये सब चीजें थोड़ा देखनी पड़े। पेमेंट बैंक किसकी रिकमेंडेशन पे आए? अगर हम देखें तो पेमेंट बैंक किसकी रिकमेंडेशन पे है, ये बताइए। नचिकेता मोर ने रिकमेंड किया था पेमेंट्स बैंक के लिए। जैसे जो पेमेंट बैंक हैं, ठीक है, वो भी शेड्यूल बैंक हो सकते हैं। Airtel Payment Bank is among the fastest growing digital bank in the country with a base of 115 million users. It offers a suite of digital solutions through the Airtel Thanks app and a retail network of more than 5,000 neighborhood banking points. The bank turned profitable in the quarter ended September 2021. Payment Bank was established to promote financial कमेटी थी बहुत, बैंकिंग कमेटी को देखने का प्रयास करो। तो बैंकिंग कमेटीज की बात करें, सारी कमेटीज को हम समझने का प्रयास करें। बैंकिंग जो कमेटीज हैं, बताइए भाई क्या किया जाए, ये हो पाएगा ऐसे इस तरीके से? सवाल आपसे नहीं हो पाएंगे, मुझे ये बता दें। नहीं हो पाए तो इसको हम दोबारा और आपको बता दें। देखो काफी चीजें हम कर चुके हैं। अगर अभी तक आपने अनअकैडमी को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है तो आप अनअकैडमी को सब्सक्राइब करिए, हमारे साथ जुड़िए। एनी टाइम एनीवेयर लाइव एंड रिकॉर्डेड सेशंस एट योर कन्वीनियंस। अपॉर्चुनिटी टू लर्न फ्रॉम द बेस्ट एजुकेटर्स इन एंड इन्फ्लुएंसर्स, तो जैसे मैंने आपको बताया कि बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। ठीक है, get access to best multiple correspondence courses, structures, pedagogy in sync with the academic calendar. Events like workshop, strategy sessions, masterclass, unlimited quizzes with the host yourself, study material in PDF format, various multiple doubt clearing sessions. विजेता यूपीपीसीएस टेस्ट सीरीज है और ये फ्री एमसीक्यू बेस्ड टेस्ट सीरीज है। टेस्ट कंडक्टेड एवरी संडे एट 10 AM। रैंक 1, 100% scholarship 1 year and above duration subscription. Rank 2 to 3, 50% scholarship of 1 year and above duration subscription, और रैंक 5, 4 to 10 50 स्कॉलरशिप आपको मिल रही है। दीज आर बैच कोर्सेज, तो ये तो मैंने जितना पढ़ाया वो सब देख लेना आप। देखो यूपीएससी मेंस ऑप्शनल कोर्स चल रहा है, रिकॉर्डेड एंड लाइव सेशंस अवेलेबल। इसमें मैंने भी प्रोवाइड का बैच कंप्लीट किया है, इस बैच को आप देखिए। धनंजय सिंह ने फिलोसफी का बैच कंप्लीट किया है। निरंकार वर्मा सर इसमें ज्योग्राफी पढ़ा रहे हैं। केश कुमार सर इसमें सोशियोलॉजी पढ़ा रहे हैं। आर के सूर्यवंशी सर हिस्ट्री के सर हैं, वो हिस्ट्री पढ़ाएंगे आपको, और अमरनाथ गुप्ता सर आपको लिटरेचर पढ़ा रहे हैं। ठीक है, विजय फॉर यूपीपीएससी पीसीएस मेंस बैचेस 2021 में ड्यूरेशन 2 मंथ का है। 11 नंबर से बैच स्टार्ट हो रहा है, इसका भी ड्यूरेशन 2 मंथ का है। 10 नवंबर से 5 मंथ का है। मेंस आंसर राइटिंग बैच पर जीएस पेपर 3 चल रहा है। जीएस पेपर 3 में डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट, ये सारी चीजें आपको पढ़ाई जाएगी। सारथी बैच यूपीपीसीएस प्रीलिम्स जीएस 2022 का सारथी बैच चल रहा है। आर के सूर्यवंशी सर हिस्ट्री पढ़ाएंगे। ढेर सारे को टॉप के टीचर्स हैं, जिसमें मैं आपको इंडियन इकोनॉमी पढ़ाऊंगा, और बैच स्टार्ट हो रहा है 16 तारीख से। 16 तारीख की डेट मत भूलिएगा, शाम को 8:35 पे हम लोग इंडियन इकोनॉमी का नया बैच स्टार्ट करेंगे। बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण बैच है, बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट बैच है, और इसको आपको सब ठीक है। इसके बाद सारथी बैच स्टार्ट हो रहा है। बैच कोर्स है यूपीपीएससी प्रीलिम्स जीएस 2022 के लिए। टॉप के टीचर्स हैं जो आपको पढ़ा रहे हैं। इस बैच में आप जुड़िए। इस बैच में मैं आपको इंडियन इकोनॉमी पढ़ा, तो जो दोनों बैच कोर्स हैं सारथी जीएस पेपर 2022 के लिए, एक बैच स्टार्ट हो रहा है 11 फरवरी से, दूसरा बैच स्टार्ट हो रहा है 16 फरवरी। ठीक है, तो दोनों नए बैच हैं। किसी भी बैच में आप एनरोल कर सकते हैं। आप किसी भी बैच में एनरोल करिए और शुरू से क्लासेस देखिए। बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण बैच है, बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण बैच है, और इस बैच को आप जरूर ज्वाइन करिए। बहुत ही अच्छा। मैं आपसे एक और अनाउंसमेंट है कि 14 तारीख से एथिक्स का नया बैच लेके आ रहा हूँ। एथिक्स का नया बैच लेके आ रहा हूँ, तो आप एथिक्स की क्लास को करिए, और इन चीजों को करने का प्रयास कीजिए। तो एथिक्स का बैच बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट बैच है, बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट बैच है आपके प्रिपरेशन। तो डेफिनेटली आप उस बैच को ज्वाइन करिए। अगर अभी तक आपने अनअकैडमी को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, तो ये मेरा सब्सक्रिप्शन कोड है, मैं लिख देता हूँ यहाँ पे। इस कोड से आप अनअकैडमी को सब्सक्राइब करिए, जीएस यूपीएससी लाइव। और अब इस कोड से अगर आप सब्सक्राइब करेंगे तो आपको 10% का डिस्काउंट भी मिले। जीएस यूपीएससी लाइव 10% का आपको डिस्काउंट भी मिले। तो अच्छा, एक चीज और है, अगर आप अनअकैडमी को सब्सक्राइब करते हो तो एक ही सब्सक्रिप्शन में, इंपॉर्टेंट है, एक ही सब्सक्रिप्शन में आप जितने भी एग्जाम यूपी पीसीएस और यूपी ट्रिपल एससी कराता है, सब एग्जाम की तैयारी कर सकते हैं। इसके बाद अगर आप फीस की बात करें तो फीस ही बहुत, जो सब्सक्रिप्शन फीस है बहुत ही रीजनेबल है। अगर आप 24 महीने के लिए हमें ज्वाइन करते हैं तो आपको मात्र आपको मात्र 510 रुपए महीने देने पड़ेंगे। और इसको भी आप चाहें तो ईएमआई में कन्वर्ट कर सकते हैं। अगर आप 12 महीने के लिए हमें ज्वाइन करते हैं तो आपको मात्र 701 रुपए पर मंथ हमें देना पड़ेगा। और आप 6 महीने के लिए ज्वाइन करते हैं तो आपको मात्र 1148 रुपए पर मंथ ज्वाइन करना पड़ेगा। और आप 3 महीने के लिए हमें ज्वाइन करते हैं तो आपको मात्र 1275 रुपए देना पड़ेगा। आप मेरा कोड यूज करिए GS UPSC लाइव, और इन सब चीजों का आप फायदा उठाएं। तो ये आप इस पे इंडिया बेस्ट एजुकेटर्स हैं, डेली इंटरेक्टिव लाइव क्लासेस हैं, लाइव मॉक टेस्ट एंड क्विजेज हैं, स्ट्रक्चर्स कोर्सेज एंड PDF हैं। सुपर कम्बो सब्सक्रिप्शन ऑफर है ऑन योर डिमांड। अब घर बैठे BPSC और UPPSC की तैयारी आप एक साथ अनअकैडमी के साथ कर सकते हैं। ढेर सारे बच्चे आते हैं जो कहते हैं सर हम UPPCS की भी तैयारी कर रहे हैं, UPSC की भी तैयारी, MPPC की तैयारी करना चाहते हैं, SC की भी तैयारी करना चाहते हैं। तो जो छात्र BPSC और UPPSC की तैयारी एक साथ करना चाहते हैं वो दोनों में इकट्ठा सब्सक्राइब कर सकते हैं। ठीक है, तो इसमें आप एक साथ सब्सक्राइब करिए। तो इसमें जो फीस है 6 मंथ की फीस वो सिर्फ 7,960 रुपये। तो इसमें आपको दोनों के टॉप एडुकेटर्स मिलेंगे, UPPCS के भी मिलेंगे और UPSC के भी आपको टॉप एडुकेटर्स मिलेंगे। अगर अभी तक आपने अनअकैडमी के यूट्यूब चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, आपने यूट्यूब चैनल को लाइक नहीं किया है, तो आप इस चैनल को लाइक करिए। 2 चैनल हैं, एक अनअकैडमी UPPSC और अनअकैडमी UPPSC। बहुत ज़्यादा फायदा होने वाला है आपको। अगर आप इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करोगे तो डेली जो भी बढ़िया वीडियोज हैं उनके जो लिंक हैं, उनके जो सूचना है वो आप तक पहुंचती रहेगी, उनकी सूचना आप तक पहुंचती रहेगी। तो आप इसको ज्वाइन करिए। इस वीडियो को भी लाइक कर दीजिएगा, शेयर कर दीजिएगा। प्रयास किया है ताकि आपको थोड़ा बहुत फाइनेंशियल मार्केट समझा पाए, बैंकिंग आपको थोड़ा सा समझा पाए। तो कोई बात नहीं, आप प्रयास करिए पूरा, इस लेक्चर को बार बार देखिए, समझने का प्रयास करिए। अगर आपको कोई डाउट है तो आप इस चीज़ को मुझसे बाद में आप कमेंट कर सकते हैं और आप उसको मुझसे पूछ सकते हैं। तब इसको पूछ लीजिएगा। ठीक है, तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब। इट इज़ योर अनअकैडमी।